I'd like to welcome everyone to our Center for Leadership Ethics 2021 Executive Ethics Symposium, sponsored by Zanes Law. My name is Paul Melendez, and I serve on the faculty, and I'm also the Assistant Department Head for the Department of Management and Organizations, and the founder of the Center for Leadership Ethics. And the Center for Leadership Ethics has quite an international reputation for not only engaging in really cutting edge organizational research on organizational ethics, but also teaching at a variety of levels various ethics courses for undergrads, MBAs, and including our doctoral students. We're also quite known for our innovative outreach programs, which can focus on K through 12, collegiate, and also our executives in our community. This program, our symposium, is kind of our marquee event. And I want to tell you that one of the overall objectives with the symposium is to provide some thought leadership. We've developed quite a knack for identifying these highly timely and relevant topics, which typically have an ethical set of considerations that are really important for all managers and leaders to consider. For example, over the past couple of years, we've looked at the merits of socially responsible investing. We've looked at some of the commercial applications of AI, specifically facial recognition. And last year, we even looked at data security, the whole collection, protection, and in fact, use of data. And this year's symposium is no exception. We'll be teeing up another really, really crucial topic, the ethical considerations of working remotely. Now, we have assembled quite an expert panel, a mixture of both people from academia and also industry to unpack this topic. The overall goal is to really provide you as participants with some fresh insights, best practices, and also kind of an ethical path forward, whether you're an employer or an employee. Now, of course, these programs just don't happen out of a vacuum. So what I'd like to now do is welcome my dear friend and also a center board member and sponsor of the symposium, Doug Zanes, to say a few words. Doug?
Hey, Paul, thanks. Yeah, I'll start with, actually, I just want to thank Paul and the Center for Leadership Ethics team for putting the symposium together. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a tremendous amount of work to get it together, and they do a fantastic job. And so thank you all for doing that. Because I think it's things like this. I started on the Center for Leadership Ethics board a number of years ago, in large part because of things like this that the program does. I mean, I think this is part and parcel to the thought leadership that this program brings, quite frankly, to the field. It's everything from this program to the high school and collegiate ethics case competitions that the program does, and all the different outreach things and programs that Paul was talking about. Because really, when you think about ethics in our world today, I think the Eller program, focuses on the business environment and the corporate environment, and but I mean that's what life is about, right? We see it every, regardless of your, for example, political persuasion. Think about politics and ethics within politics, or, some people would probably say a lack of ethics within politics. But you have it in business, you have it in politics. Ethics has always been a big thing in the legal profession. But when you really get down to the brass tacks of it, it's about thought. It's about thinking about decisions that you're making and how they impact the world around us and how those decisions impact the people around us. And Eller and this program are at the forefront of thought when it comes to ethics. And that's what this program is about. We're going to talk about remote working, which Paul and I think first started talking about a number of years ago. And it's interesting how you come full circle, and we're coming out of a year of everything that COVID has brought to us, and everything that we've had to do and endure and go through over the last year. And so remote working has sort of come to the forefront for this symposium. and everything that it involves, and that's different, from different within organizations, right? Small businesses have to have a different perspective than the corporate environment or big business, which is different than government entities. And it directly affects everybody that works for us or within those industries or those professions or those companies. And everybody has a part to play. The company has a part to play. The employees have a part to play. And it's interesting to me how it's changed the entire environment. I mean, I can think of myself as a consumer and everything that we've done over the last year as, for example, as I've gotten on conference calls with vendors that we work with, and we're talking about, something that certainly is important to the business who provides whatever that service is or that product to us. And I look at the environment and I can either, see clothes hanging off the edge of a door or somebody wearing a baseball cap, but they're working, and it seems minor, but from a business perspective and from an employee perspective, it's still work. This is still our profession. And so now suddenly everybody has to adjust to all these new things to juggle, whether it's working with young children in the house and how that dynamic changes things. On the business end is trying to understand employees differently, so we still provide a good work environment for them, but it's a totally different environment. How do we create culture within a company if everybody is off in different places? How do we connect? How do we support our employees or train them? How do we, deal with customer issues if everybody's spread out somewhere? And so it'll be an interesting conversation with everybody who sort of has insights and inputs. And there's not necessarily, it really is at the right time, I think. Schedules, the informality of schedules, right? Different companies. Our company is big on formal schedules. We have flexibility in what those schedules are, but if your schedule is 7 a.m. to 4 p.m., that's your schedule. But we have to kind of address, well, but what's the big deal? I'm at home. So I started at 7:30, right? And I think every company has a different approach, and it's not necessarily right or wrong, but a big part of that is communication. And as I was sort of thinking about today, it certainly helped me focus on things I haven't communicated effectively when I think about problems we've had. And communication, I think, has become such a huge piece of this, because for me, or to me, I think it's much more challenging when everybody's off in a different place. When I can step two doors down and knock on someone's door and have a conversation, it's been much easier. I mean, I had one of those conversations this morning, but if I had to get on a call, set it up, and make time for it, as opposed to just walking down and knocking on the door, maybe it would have never happened. I mean, so there's all these adjustments, and and then there's the idea that not everybody wants to work remotely. When how do you deal with a company saying, hey, everybody's working remotely, we're just making this shift, and you have somebody who's single, lives in an apartment, and if they don't come to work, they're alone all day, and they'd rather actually come to work. But now there's no longer work to come to. So there are all of these different things. And so that's what today's about. So I won't take up too much time. If Paul was looking for time to fill, I could certainly fill it over the next 20, 30 minutes.
Doug, I'd like to just, again, thank you for, your support over the years as a board member with our center, but also your financial support, which allows these programs to happen. So I appreciate your thoughts, Doug, and you being here with us again today.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to also now welcome my colleague Mariah Brown to talk a little bit about this new platform that we're using, which is called Remo. So Mariah, welcome, and I'd like you to say a few words about Remo.
Hi, everybody. So I'm sure you've noticed that this isn't Zoom. Everybody's, a little bit zoomed out, I think. So we wanted to try something new and be a little bit innovative like we do at Eller. So this program up at the top in the right-hand corner, you'll see that there's a chat function as well as a Q&A. Chat has a general chat that will just send to everybody. but you can also send private messages to anybody in the symposium. Next to that, you'll also see a box that says Q&A. I've gone ahead and just thrown a couple sample questions in there so you can see. Whenever somebody types a question in there, there's an option to, you can see these little arrows next to it. Oh, I really want to know the answer to that question. Go ahead and upvote it, and it will bring it to the top of the list so we know where to spend our time and what questions are most important to you. If you don't see your question at all, feel free to just put it down at the bottom there and hit the button that says ask. That's pretty much it, but down at the bottom of the screen in the left-hand corner, you'll see a little question mark. If at any point you have any issues in Remo, go ahead and click that, and that contacts the customer service. You can just send them a message, and they're pretty quick to get back to you. I think that's all I have. We're going to go into a networking thing at the end, but we'll talk about that as soon as the panel session is over.
Okay, thank you, Mariah. I really appreciate your thoughts on that. And I'd like to also introduce everyone to my colleague, also on the faculty and our Associate Director for the Center for Leadership Ethics, Michael Fricke. Michael is going to be handling one of the toughest tasks today, which is to try to monitor, along with Mariah, all of the questions that we're sure are going to come forward from our participants, which are joining us through Remo from all parts of the world. We probably are going to hit close to 300 people today. So Michael, if you'd like to just say hello to everyone very quickly.
Yeah, hey everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for the symposium today. Like Paul said, I'm going to be sort of monitoring the chat and the Q&A. If you would use the Q&A, it would be a little easier, but Mariah and I will monitor them both, and then I'll check back in with you guys when we shift to the Q&A portion. I'm going to be moderating that part. So looking forward to a terrific symposium today. Thanks, Paul.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Michael. So we're about to begin the program officially. Let me just give everyone a quick high-level overview of the structure of the symposium. The first round is essentially going to involve each of our panelists, who I'm going to introduce here in just a moment, to address a really important question, which is, based on this past year, what have we learned about employees' motivation, the impact of working remote on organizational culture, and of course, performance. So each of our panelists are going to have 10 minutes to tee that up and also talk a little bit about how this has played out in their respective organizations. Round two will be a very specific question for me. I'll be asking one of our panelists about the recent decision to allow employers to incentivize employees to take vaccines, some thoughts on that. And then for a couple of other panelists, I have a little different question, which is, given the new CDC guidelines and some of the guidance that's been provided by the EEOC, it's this classic legal but ethical question, right? And how do employers and will they plan to approach the issue of vaccinations with their employees? And so then we'll move into our third round, which is a very specific question I have for each of the panelists. And then our final round is going to be the general Q&A round, where again, Mariah and Michael will be monitoring questions, and then Michael will take over and ask each of our panelists questions from all of our participants. So with that being said, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our panel. So the first panel member that we have is a colleague, Dr. Allison Gabriel, who's also on the faculty. She's a professor in our Department of Management and Organization. She's also a Robbins Fellow. So Dr. Gabriel, thank you for joining us. Good morning.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Or
good morning.
No, not good afternoon yet. I was just going to check. I was like, what time is it?
It could be morning, afternoon, or evening, you know, with these virtual environments. So thank you, Allie, for being here with us. I'd like to now introduce Michael Schneider, who is the Vice President, Risk Management and Compliance and Chief Compliance Officer of San Diego Gas and Electric. So Michael, welcome.
Thank you, Paul, and it's great to be here. And it is morning out in San Diego still, so for a little while longer. I think we're on the same time zones now, but anyway, it's a real pleasure to be a part of this panel. Really important stuff.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. And yay, we've got Catherine. If anybody knew, I think my heart rate and everyone else's heart rate was racing, because with any new platforms and technologies and corporate security, which is a good thing these days, You never know how new platforms are going to play. So Catherine, thank you so much. We're grateful to have you here. Catherine Ellingson is the Executive Vice President, Chief Legal Officer, Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer, and Corporate Secretary for Republic Services. So Catherine, welcome.
Thank you, Paul. And good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I just took 10 years off my life, and I guess that's just one of the challenges I'm sure we've all faced from time to time in the last year plus, working and living in the virtual world here. But apparently my company did an IT upgrade last night, some sort of security upgrade, unbeknownst to me. And that's all really, really good stuff, except when you're about to speak on a panel and you don't know that upgrade has happened. So it is truly a pleasure to be here. And my heart rate will calm down in a few more minutes. So.
Outstanding. Thank you, Catherine. So I'm going to go ahead and in just a moment pose the first question of round one to our panel. We're going to start with Dr. Gabriel, then we're going to go to Michael, and then we're going to go to Catherine. And I just want to kind of get everyone to think a little bit about something which I think we are very well aware of, right? Employers right now are facing some incredible challenges. And as I speak, I know that organizations, public and private, big and small, throughout the US and the world are having these discussions right now, right, on what to do. And they're facing a couple of really unique challenges. One is the reluctance that employees have expressed about vaccinations, but also the reluctance of some employees to really want to come back to work, right? And so these are really interesting times. So again, I think that the timing of this is really, really important. So the first question that I'm going to ask our panel, and again, we'll start with Dr. Gabriel, then Michael, then Catherine. Each of you have 10 minutes, but if you don't need the 10 minutes, we can sweep up that time and apply it to the next rounds and overall Q&A. The first question for Dr. Gabriel is, given what we've learned this past year, based on your academic research, what would you like to share with us in terms of what we've learned about employee motivation, the impact of working remotely on organizational culture, and of course, performance? So I'm going to hand it over to you now, Dr. Gabriel.
Yeah, thanks so much. To give you all a little bit of a background about me, so I'm an organizational psychologist by training. So my primary area of research before the pandemic was just motivation and the psychology of motivation. So how can we communicate effectively with our employees to make sure that they find value and meaning and purpose in the things that they're doing? And a lot of that often is about in-person communication, as Doug said, having those opportunities to go down the hall and have those conversations, those touch points with people. And the pandemic has really stripped that away. And so when I was thinking about this question, the good news is that remote work has actually been around for a really long time. The problem is that everybody just got thrown into it without much preparation, but there's a lot of really excellent research that's informed some really good decisions that we've made over the last year or so. And so in thinking about this, what I wanted to do is provide some kind of actionable recommendations. Some are COVID specific, things that have emerged in the last year, but then some of them honestly are things that can transcend even when we return. And I don't like saying, post-COVID, because I think that's unrealistic, right? There's always going to be some risk or other things in the future that we need to think about. But just some things are going to transcend multiple modalities in a variety of different ways that we can return to work. So time limits make me nervous. So because of that, I had to take notes because I knew otherwise I would just go off the rails. So if you see me glancing to the side, it's because I do have some notes in front of me because there were so many points I could have made, and I want to make sure I hit a few of the big ones. The first thing I want to state is that I think there's this misconception that we need to be in person to be motivated to perform. And that's really not the case. We've seen lots of examples of organizations really thriving in this environment because a lot of employees thrive on autonomy, right? Of having control over the work and the nature of how they do it and what it is that they're working on. And so I think that's a good thing that we've all learned that we can adapt and survive in these unusual circumstances. And so here are some specific things that we've seen in the research on this that can really help people stay motivated, even when they have so many things really competing for their time. At a basic level, and maybe this is relevant to Catherine's point, is to make sure all employees are supported technologically. And I know that sounds very simple, but as we started doing research on employees and remote work, that was stressor number one for them. Is they're like, it's really hard for me to perform my job when you're asking me to juggle Slack and Google Documents and Zoom, and I can't do Zoom because of childcare related challenges. And this is really frustrating for me. So I don't think a lot of employers really took a step back to ask people how they were feeling about a variety of these modalities. And so really having those conversations, even though we're a year in and maybe it feels a little late, is really important for employees to feel valued and to sustain their motivation for whatever changes you're thinking about moving forward. The other piece that I think is really important is to think about how you want to communicate with your employees. There's a misconception that meetings have upticked. The data actually suggests that if anything, meetings have declined slightly, which I know from my N of 1 feels not true. I feel like I'm on Zoom all day, every day. But so you want to think really carefully about what are the types of communications you're having with your employees. Because when there's added silence, that often contributes to states of anxiety. And once employees feel anxious, they start filling in the gaps. They start assuming the worst. They will come up with their own storyline for why you as a manager or your team member isn't talking to them. And we want to really try to avoid that. And so how can we do that? Well, there's a lot of really cool best practices around meetings in general, and they really apply to virtual meeting formats. So when you are structuring your meetings, check in with people, ask people how they're feeling. That sounds really basic, but I cannot tell you the number of meetings I've been on where there's no small talk anymore. And that's one of the things that employees miss the most. Small talk isn't a nuance. It actually serves a functional purpose for us to warm up in our social connections and our conversations with other people. So structuring our meetings to really allow for that is incredibly helpful. As a leader or as a manager, if you're the person running the meeting, you should be modeling this behavior. This is going to be a common theme for me today. Managers really need to set the signals for what's expected of employees in these virtual formats, and encourage everybody to speak, right? So something that I've noticed and our research actually shows is that people who are really struggling in this virtual modality right now are newer employees in the organization. People who did not have the opportunity to in-person network and socialize and understand the scripts for how things are going. So as a person leading a team, or even just being a good colleague, if you notice somebody newer in your group and they're not speaking up, try to engage conversation with them, bring them into the story. The other thing that I really like that I don't think we ever really did in person, but we probably should have, is engage in what researchers call redundant communication post-meeting. Sending out these nice summary emails to everybody on your team or your group saying, hey, here were the key points that we made. Here's who's going to do what. Let's all touch base in a few days about this. I'm guilty. I never did this after meetings. And this would create problems even when we were in person. It would undermine motivation because people would have a lack of clarity or something I thought was really clear wasn't. And this has been something that I've started to do as well to make sure that everybody is on board. One thing I also want to share, and it's interesting because we're all here. That would have been, I guess, odd for me if I was like, I'm not going to do that today. But one thing we're studying a lot is actually the impact of cameras on employee motivation. And so we have research that's undergoing at one of our top journals in the field where we actually find that using the camera undermines employee engagement in their own meetings. The use of the camera is incredibly fatiguing. I know right now, personally, I'm a little distracted because I'm watching me talk in the camera. And I'm like, oh, cool, that is what I look like. And I'm not enjoying it. But then I'm finding myself distracted looking at all the other cameras and trying to figure out, well, how are people reacting? What's going on? So there's something unique about virtual meetings that doesn't replicate in person. And I think it's this heightened level of monitoring and self-presentation. And so we find that when people are using the camera, that correlates with increased feelings of fatigue, and then they're actually less likely to voice out ideas and stay engaged in the meeting that they're a part of. And so I say this not to suggest, oh, and by the way, unfortunately, that effect is stronger for women and for newer employees. Again, for some of these socialization concerns around newer employees, and then for women, the pandemic has been incredibly hard for motivation because of added childcare responsibilities that disproportionately are going to women in the household. And so the solution with what I'm saying here is not everybody turn your camera off, but maybe we can think about how to allow employees to have some autonomous choice with when the camera is on or off. I think there is this misconception that camera off means unengaged, and that's not necessarily what we're seeing. Oh man, here I thought I was going to have lots of extra time. That's not true. One final point I do want to make, or maybe two final points if Paul will let me. One thing that I think will really help with engagement and motivation right now is to continue to encourage employees to remember the why behind their job. Why is it that they're doing the work that they are doing, even if it's a really mundane, ordinary task? Reminding employees of how their work, even remotely or virtually, is fitting into the bigger picture, the bigger goals for the organization, is going to be really, really important. Intrinsic drivers of motivation really promote performance above and beyond any extrinsic motivators. And that's going to be something I'll talk about in the next question. And finally, for you, if I can make a plea, it's that one of the things that's been most disrupted that really affects motivation is the fact that work and non-work boundaries are busted. They don't exist anymore. I'm coming to you from my home gym. And it's very likely that my 15-month-old will come storming in here at some point in the next hour and a half. Like, there's just nothing I can do about it. And so things that people have been recommending that are helpful to maintain your motivation are keeping routines, setting a wake up time, a start of time, an end of time, really trying to have a transition to work. So my office commute is me walking through our garage to this guest room that I'm staying in right now. And that is enough for me to kind of mentally reset myself. And then again, try to pick that stop time for you. And if you're a manager, this is really, really important for you to do as well. If you're sending your employees emails, pings, whatever, at all hours of the day, at 3 o'clock in your morning, you're now signaling to your employees that you expect that from them as well. So at a time where well-being is just really tense and fraught for everybody, I would just encourage you to think about the behaviors you're modeling, how that's affecting your own well-being and motivation, and then think about how it might be affecting the motivation of those around you. So that's it.
Excellent. Thank you, Allie. Okay, so Michael, you are up next, my friend.
Well, first off, Dr. Gabriel, as you were speaking, I want to give you a little bit of confirmation that much of your research and observations are actually very much in practice. In our company, and in just conversations with other colleagues, I see a lot of that, whether it's shadow the leader and making sure that you're demonstrating, the ways to really do things in a remote setting without taxing your employees, versus, the camera on or off and other attributes. So really appreciate the confirmation of a lot of the things we are doing. But, we're in the first inning now of this world in the context of, as we start to move forward with coming back and thinking about how this pandemic has affected us, I think we're seeing a brave new world that was accelerated in the context of technologies that were always out there. And as you mentioned, there was always some sliver of industry that was doing remote working, but now we've just done it on steroids on a global basis. And I think that we're going to get some great things coming out of this going forward, but we do need to think about it from the standpoint of its ethical and employee impacts and how we do things right going forward, and not just focus from the standpoint of, is it making us more productive? Maybe just a little bit of background on our company. I'm within the Sempra family of companies with San Diego Gas and Electric. We've got about 4,000 employees within the Sempra family, which is about 17,000 to 18,000 employees. And the good news going into this pandemic is, our culture is one where we've been battle tested many times, whether it's responding to wildfires that have become very pervasive and common in the California area, or IT issues that we've faced. So, our company has been one where we've had to deal with emergencies and responses and test our resiliency. So as we were looking, at the beginning of last year with what was happening in the global world with COVID, and started thinking about, is this going to hit us or is this not going to hit us? I can remember the end of February 2000, I was actually back at North Carolina State at a risk conference. And, that was the buzz. Is this now a risk we've really got to focus in on? And how's it going to impact us? So, fortunately, thinking about our company, thinking about our culture, we've tested it many times, and it really was putting that plan into action and immediately moving into that direction. I remember being on the phone with our general counsel and then with our CEO and quickly figuring out we've got to put a sort of business continuity work team around this and start to work this right away, which we did. We looked at all of our risks, we looked at our company operations, and we went immediately into sort of, let's operationalize this. So the month of March of last year was all about operationalizing how we would deal with this and how it would impact our employees. The interesting thing with the utility business, and I'm sure Catherine has the same issues, we're not all remote and we're not all field. We have a combination of both. And so we had to quickly figure out how we would facilitate business continuity in a critical business. I mean, as the rest of corporate, as the rest of the world is moving into this remote setting, what's the most important thing beyond technology? It's powering that technology to ensure that people have the capabilities to continue to work. So we were a critical piece of that business. Our ability to keep the lights on, keep technology going, keep the gas flowing was very much at the center stage of ensuring that we had continuity so that, our communities, our businesses, everyone had the ability to pivot into this brave new world. We had a call to action regarding that and quickly moved in that direction and focused in on what's this going to do to our employee base. So we focused on getting those that could work remotely into the remote setting immediately, worked with our ID departments to quickly figure out what gaps we had from the context of now we've got a variety of remote workstations that we've got to ensure have continuity from the standpoint of being plugged in and have continuity from the standpoint of running the daily business. Catherine, what you talked about as far as those patchings, that happens all the time, right? I mean, it's the nature of our business to constantly test, but we're always being surprised with things. So we needed to make sure we were testing those things. And in one area in particular, we focused in on was our ability to respond to emergencies. I talked about wildfires. Those are an important part of our business now to ensure that we're not an ignition source. And if we do have fires, we run an emergency operating center very much plugged into CAL FIRE and other first responders to ensure we're doing what we can to effectively monitor and extinguish wildfires before they have catastrophic effects. And we were tested in that last year, first in the early September timeframe, with a very substantial fire that happened out in our backcountry, where we had to do for the first time that entire fire remotely from everyone's individual remote settings. Now, we had backup plans if we had technology failures. Fortunately, we didn't have to use them, but that's the idea of contingency planning. But the good news is we started to gain a level of comfort with that, and we started to recognize that maybe remote management of crisis actually can work better in some instances by having these type of technology platforms that everyone sees the same thing. I mean, you put up a map, everyone sees the same map. You put up a certain level of a dialogue, technology actually provides you with opportunities to have greater alignment. So we actually saw some positivity from that. But we did have issues related to, the field force. How are we going to get them new areas where they felt safe? And that's a big part of our culture, was ensuring our employees always felt safe with what we were asking them to do. So we had to focus in on new operating procedures, masking, COVID testing. So we're testing thousands and thousands of employees at our various sites. New vehicle policies. We did not want to have employees traveling in the vehicles together for the fear of COVID exposure. So we had to go out and change all of our policies with our field force so that we gave them comfort that we were in fact 3 steps ahead of the potential to have COVID become an issue for them. No different than just suiting up. I mean, we still go into customer homes. So how would we do that in the standpoint of this world and not expose our employees to the potential for this virus by them going into a customer home to deal with a solution. So we focused on that, and we focused on the remote setting, and we really did, I think, come up with some great things. Now, I was plugged into a variety of networks as we were doing this, as well as my colleagues. I had a weekly call with global electric and energy industry contacts. So I was actually getting a lot of updated and like, state of what was going on in the world information that we could take back to Southern California right away. I was having calls with my European counterparts and trying to figure out what they were doing in the context of not only protecting their employees, but how are they dealing with business continuity issues related to revenue recovery and other things that were also important parts of our business. So we were able to bring that back and start putting working teams together on longer term risk management endeavors. And I was reporting that out to our CEO real time. So we had a lot of alignment along the way on what we were doing there and the ways we were doing things. And just a couple of more things, as I look at our culture, a couple of things were very apparent to me. One, our employees rose to the occasion. We're a goal-oriented culture, and people tended to really focus on this. I think, I was very proud of how our employees responded to it. We had very small percentage COVID in our ranks because we were staying well ahead of it. I mentioned to Paul and others in a class, we actually took a group of some of our most specialized employees that run our grid, and we actually sequestered them and kept them in trailers during the height of COVID, concerned that if these folks got ill, we wouldn't be able to run our critical operations. So we actually had to do some very unique things. And did our employees raise concerns about it? No. They knew that this was important, and they rose to the occasion. And putting mission in front of your employee base is very, very important on the motivational front. It gives the employees a sense of doing something greater than themselves. And it really sort of dealt with a lot of the, what's in it for me issues by just keeping mission front and center, keeping safety at the forefront. So again, the benefit of the doubt that what we're asking you to do is something we would do ourselves, which to me is a very important thing in the context of how your employees react. If they know that they're being asked to do something, if they know that their welfare is in mind, that's an important piece to it. And in addition to that, we asked for a lot of feedback. So the issues that Dr. Gabriel talked about as far as, the new environment with remote working, we were asking our employees, is this working okay? Do you have your equipment? Do we need to provide you with, other ergonomic things to make your jobs easier? Do you have childcare? Do you have issues from the standpoint of, your kids having to be at school remotely and how you get your job done? One of the things we recognized is that we needed to stop scheduling meetings over lunch because everyone was just getting inundated with things. So we needed to start putting into place some new cultural norms to just give people breaks. But that came from the constant solicitation and feedback we got from our employee base. And we just provided more touch points. I do a weekly touch point with my division, every Friday. In fact, just before this symposium, I had that meeting with our folks where we have our teams come in. And within that half hour, we give updates on what's going on at the corporation. And we actually bring employees into the meeting to share what they're doing. And we do meet new employees. In fact, we had a couple of new employees we met today and a couple that we are moving on. So it's a great opportunity, even though it's only a half hour, to keep things consistent and keep people aligned. And the bottom line as I end here is, I think we have found remote working. We're going to focus in on a hybrid type of work structure once we come back over the Labor Day timeframe, and we're going to test that and see how it works for the benefit of our organizations going forward. And I'll save some of that for the second question, because I think there's a lot of considerations as we start to look at making permanent some of these lessons learned and some of these new resiliency things that we've saw. So again, I think we had a great experience, but I think a lot of that came again from the standpoint that we drew from our culture and we drew from our experiences of the past, and we're able to fit them here. So I'll stop there, and hopefully that was a sliver of recognition of some of the things we did that I think very much aligned, Dr. Gabriel, with what you're studying and what you talked about in your upfront comments.
Very good. Thank you, Michael. Much appreciated. So Catherine, we're going to go ahead and turn to you now.
All right, thank you. And I echo what Michael says about Dr. Gabriel's advice and insights and research, because it's very much been our experience as well at Republic Services. And I don't know if it's good or bad, but our story here at Republic is very similar to what Michael just described. So hopefully you'll find some maybe interesting distinctions, but very much the same story. Here at Republic Services, just to give you a little bit of context too to our business, we are a provider of waste and recycling services and environmental solutions across the country. And we have about 35,000 employees in 40 plus states. And so most of our employees are out there on the front line every day. About 28,000 of our employees are out, driving trucks, technicians, working on landfills, working in recycling centers, dispatchers, customer service agents. And so the vast majority of our workforce has always, kind of been out there and continues to be out there every day. And, we have essential workers, and we're also considered essentially a second responder in times of crisis. So after those first responders come in, whether it's natural disaster, storms, other events, the debris needs to be cleared, the way needs to be paved to return to normalcy and let others get in. And so as an organization and a culture, our people are just built for crisis. They're built to, rise to the occasion in times of adversity. And as Michael says, it's just kind of part of our mission, and our folks put mission above themselves. And it was no different, through this pandemic. But I would say that, we were already a high performing, highly engaged organization before the pandemic hit. We were well positioned to have a great 2020. And we still did end up having a great year, but we've really had to figure out very quickly how to flex and pivot and start leading and motivating our teams in very different ways. And we've learned a lot of great lessons from having done so over the year. There's nothing like a crisis, I think, to sharpen one's focus and to drive out any complacency from the system. Everyone has to get extremely, laser focused on what they need to do. And that happened again through the pandemic here for us at Republic. And so we were focused from a leadership and performance and motivation standpoint on two very different types of work groups. They're the frontline employees, safety first for us as well. Safety is our overarching principle for everything. And that was in all of our communications throughout the pandemic, that our decisions regarding the pandemic came first from a safety perspective, safety for our employees, safety for our customers. And then beyond that, there were many other priorities, but safety first. And then how do we continue to motivate and manage and lead that front line, while also in a different way doing the same with, our office workers. And just to give you a little bit further kind of context around what was going on and is going on at Republic is, we are, before the pandemic, we were in the midst of just a lot of discussions around flexibility in the workplace, flexible work schedules, remote work schedules, hybrid, lots and lots of discussion, but no real decisions, because we feel really strongly, we still do, we did and we do, that we are much better together. We are much better in person. Collaboration, innovation, the sort of the spontaneous interactions you have when you're working together in an office. And so our culture for a long, long time has been very much in person, very relational. We fly across country to go to meetings. That in person was highly valued. And so coming up against that, though, was an element of, our team saying, I need some more flexibility. I want to work differently. I can still be highly engaged and I can be a high performer without being in the office every day. So it started these discussions even before the pandemic. And like I said, a lot of discussion, but no decisions. the pandemic then forced us into I guess a forced experiment around remote work. And so we had to flip the switch overnight. We were doing the same thing, as Michael kind of back early in the year, like what's on the horizon here, and we better switch into, business continuity mode. And is this going to be 2 weeks or a month, or, what's going to happen, but we better be ready and start planning. And so overnight, as many employers did, we flipped the switch and we sent thousands of people home to start working remotely. And there was great consternation about that. Can we do that? What about the technology, the equipment? How are we going to manage people? How are we going to lead people? And we were able to seamlessly move, 1,200 customer service agents home overnight. And we didn't miss a beat with our customers. Everyone else who wasn't required to show up on the front line to drive a truck or fix a truck or run a landfill really was sent home to work remotely. So, we were thinking, what happens now? Is this weeks or months? Like what are we doing? And obviously it wasn't weeks. And so we had to learn to adapt over time. And so I won't repeat, some of what Dr. Gabriel said and Michael, but the leaders had to get creative and figure out new and different ways to engage and keep people motivated. And I think communication can't be overstated, the importance of communication. Just even if we don't know the answer, at least our employees know we're thinking about things like a permanent work from home model, or are we going to require people to get vaccinated, or do we have to wear masks? Just like it. So we tried to always stay ahead on the communications front. And I think that held folks together a lot through the last months here. But it's just been a really interesting time, and I know we're going to talk more about this in subsequent questions, but like, what's the future look like now? And what do we take in terms of what we've learned, and how do we preserve the good that came out, the silver linings that came out of the pandemic, and use those to continue to successfully run our businesses. I think interesting, discussions that, we had here, which many employers are having, is can you effectively lead and manage someone remotely as if they were in the office or workspace down the hall from you as a manager? And it really brought out, I think it brought out for employers this idea of kind of, there's probably two different camps of people, leaders who just kind of approach from a, I inherently trust my employees versus leaders who inherently don't trust their employees. And so you have to earn that trust. And so, those that fall into this camp of inherent distrust tend to be the ones that I want my employees back. And it's easier to manage people when you're in an office with them than when they're remote. So it's produced a lot of really great discussions at our company, and I know for a lot of companies, all over the world now. But we've learned how to adapt. We have, we did a great program for our field employees to keep them motivated, which we call Committed to Serve, and we provided them, gift cards and encourage them to use money to support the communities we service. And we provided an assortment of, of gifts and cards and meals to our frontline employees for many months to just keep them motivated, to keep them, excited to get out every day and do their jobs with great, customer satisfaction. And so that program went over really well because it really brought everyone together, even more strongly. And so it's been a great journey through the pandemic in terms of trying to figure out and leverage how to lead people. I do agree with Dr. Gabriel, meetings, the distraction and the exhaustion that happens with being on Zoom calls. I know there's studies out there that talk about, it's another type of multitasking, that the brain is just constantly looking and just, there's so much activity going on call with all this, speakers and the faces that the brain can't process and concentrate as well. And so that fatigue is a very real thing. I think for us, we also tried to engage and found successfully to engage on a more personal level with our employees. In a lot of ways, we were able to slow down and learn a lot more about our employees and their personal lives and their personal interests, and anything from what your background is showing. Hey, I like the painting you have up. Tell me about that painting. Or, how they're dressed, the sweatshirt they might have had on that day. And it just enabled a lot of manager-employee relationships to become even closer and on a more personal level, which I think strengthens those relationships for the longer term. So we did, we really tried to engage people. I think boundaries is another key point. Boundaries, mental health and well-being has been a concern we've been following the last few months, because in the early months of the pandemic, there's all this adrenaline going and everyone's just, I've got to do what I've got to do. And then, there was a phase of, we all settled in, and now there's that exhaustion factor that has kicked in. And so we're trying to be very, very cognizant now of the health and well-being of our employees. So we're trying to engage in creative ways to monitor that and make sure people are speaking up, telling us what's on their minds, telling us how they're feeling, how they're doing in a obviously legally appropriate way. And but that's what we're doing now, and I think it's resulted in some just great focus on the relationship building between leaders and employees. And so I will stop because I know we're quickly moving through our time here, but very similar experience to Michael's, and definite validation of everything Dr. Gabriel said.
Very good. Thank you, Catherine. Much appreciated. So we're going to move into our round 2 of questions. And so what I'd like to ask all of our panelists is try to get your response in within 2 to 3 minutes, falling short of a timekeeper, which I don't really like being, but Allie, I'm going to go ahead and start with you. The employers have been given, some clearance by the EEOC to offer incentives. I know Doug and I had an interesting conversation, so long as the incentives aren't, but I'd like for you to maybe just give a couple of your thoughts, Allie, in 2 to 3 minutes on incentives that employers can use. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so incentives are notoriously tricky for anything, let alone a vaccine like this. And the problem is that with incentives, there's really no one size fits all. I think we incorrectly assume that all employees are motivated by the same thing. That same thing is usually assumed to be money, and that's often not the case. So what we find is that when we start throwing these extrinsic motivators at people like money or a bonus, it has really short-lived benefits versus the more long-term kind of change-oriented things that you're trying to incentivize with the rewards itself. So, and people are getting really creative. I mean, we're from I did my PhD work in Ohio. If you live in Ohio right now, you're entered into lotteries for $1 million at random if you've been vaccinated. Other companies are doing really creative things. So in terms of what I think makes sense for how to motivate people to get the vaccines, first is to rely on stories and not statistics if you want to do that. Newscasters right now are getting incredibly creative with how they are framing the COVID pandemic. So there was a quote from a news source a few weeks ago where they said, the global death toll at 2 million people in January, it's as if 10 of the world's largest commercial jets fell out of the sky every day for an entire year. That is dramatic, but it doesn't connect with people the same as it does if you have employees who are maybe willing to be advocates or spokespeople for the virus and say, look, here's how this affected me and my family. This is really personally meaningful to me. And, getting vaccinated, I hope you will listen and consider for people like me and my family. That is one way to be more motivating. The other is to focus on short-term versus long-term gains. I think we're incorrectly framing vaccines as a means to end the pandemic, which of course it is, but making people focus more on the short term of, look, it's going to make your day-to-day life feel better. You can go into a grocery store, you can get your hair cut, you can interact with colleagues who maybe have kids or immunocompromised family members who can't get vaccinated. It's just going to help you in the short term. Emphasizing that is really, really critical. And finally, if I can stress this, make getting vaccinated easy for your employees. Can you give them time off? Can you structure, some companies I know are trying to bring the vaccines to their organizational campuses. try not to make people use sick leave. Sick leave is precious. We don't have a lot of mandated leave in the United States. And so I think making access easier, saying, look, we're going to give everybody the afternoon. Go ahead, like go get vaccinated with that time. I think that is a really helpful way to go ahead and do this. Again, for people who have childcare or other care responsibilities where they really need all of those leave hours available to them.
Excellent. Thank you, Allie. Much appreciated. So to Michael and Catherine, back to the EEOC, it seems as if it has given some cover to employers if they decide to mandate vaccinations for employees. It's generally considered legal so long as employers are making exemptions for people with religious and medical for religious and medical reasons. But the real question is it ethical? So Michael, I'd like to kind of begin with you. Again, you got 2 to 3 minutes. Give us your top of mind thoughts on that question.
Well, that's a loaded question. First off, that's a question. I mean, is it ethical? I mean, let me respond from sort of a company standpoint, and maybe also follow up on Dr. Gabriel's point about accessibility, because I think it's very, very important. And we also need to recognize that we're sort of in the spectrum right now where people are sort of trying to figure out, should I do it? Should I not do it? Those people that have gotten vaccinated, are they going to grow an arm out through their forehead, or something bad going to happen that I need to just still sit on the fence? Or are they going to be the people that get to go travel? Are they going to get the people that the world opens up to? And you know what? Maybe I should follow suit with that. So I think we're sort of in that spectrum right now. And just to sort of cut to the chase on where we are right now, we're not mandating vaccines at this point in time or thinking about that. We're sort of following Cal OSHA and some of our other legal employer entities as far as recognizing that we want to, there's so much information out there that it's hard to know what's right and what's wrong. And I think we all learned that through this whole pandemic. Who are we going to listen to, and do they have good information? And is herd immunity even possible? Who knows? But the key is, from an employer standpoint, you really want to make sure you're providing your employees with access to what we all are gaining as far as transparency of information and resources. And one of the things that we did earlier this year, as the vaccine was becoming available, we worked with the state to be recognized as a first responder. So our entire employee base got to the head of the line. So instead of saying it's mandated that you need a vaccine, we got our employees to the head of the line and said, listen, guys, this is important. Go do it. And then we made a concerted effort to make the availability of it very pervasive by partnering. We actually partnered with CAL FIRE and their paramedics and set up sites where our employees could go and get vaccinated instead of having to go to these other places and try to make appointments. So we made it very much available to them, and we kept the word, and we keep the word out from the standpoint of bringing experts in, whether they're the doctors in the medical areas, to help encourage the dialogue around what our employees should do. We feel that we're all trying to get information together here. And by being informative, not only in the context of our employee base, but in the communities too. A lot of the underserved communities are the most skeptical to getting the vaccines in the first place. And our employees work and live in those communities. So, far be it from us to all of a sudden take this ivory tower, you must do this, first really trying to help educate and provide folks with an understanding of what makes the most sense going forward. Does that mean that down the line we're not going to revisit these things? We're revisiting, our legal parameters and everything, and we're particularly focused on what are the legal parameters as we move towards this hybrid work environment, from the standpoint of where can employees work, what are their work requirements and locations going to look like, etc. There's a lot of legal issues that are going to come out of this, and a lot of ethical things we need to continue to focus in on. But I think the key for us is, instead of making it black and white, it's providing a spectrum and providing sort of an essence of who are you as a company? And as Catherine and I talked about, if we're putting safety first and foremost in the forefront of our employees, they're going to get a sense of when it's time to sort of move forward if they're holding off on getting that vaccine, and they're going to recognize when to move forward with it. And hopefully some of the other things going on, like these lotteries, et cetera, will provide a certain level of incentive. But at the end of the day, it's just being that conduit to good information, being transparent on getting the right things out there, and having folks make decisions that hopefully are decisions for the collective versus individual decisions that may or not be in sync with things. So hopefully that provides a level of how we're looking at it going forward.
Perfect. Thank you, Michael. Catherine, how about yourself? Same question that I asked of Michael.
Sure. Yeah, it's a interesting and tricky question, and it is a full-time job just to keep up with the information and trying to understand what's accurate and what's inaccurate. And, you know, it's nice that the EEOC has provided the clarification that employers can mandate the vaccine and can provide incentives. But, you know, the question is, just because you can, should you? And, you know, to me, it's really, there's a public policy question here, and just kind of the you know, it's public health versus personal choice. And it can get really tricky and really political quickly. There are strong views on both sides. And so, for us as a company, you know, again, through the lens of safety, you know, early on, we really thought of the vaccine and, you know, whether we were going to mandate it if we could, or even encourage it. Our story may be slightly different from others, but early on, you know, our discussions were, you know, if we can require it, will we, should we encourage it? Should we be neutral? What should we do? And, you know, we approached it initially more from a legal concern, because, you know, there was so much out there about, you know, is it safe? And, you know, again, is it, what's going to happen is, you know, are people going to grow a second head when they get vaccinated? And, you know, is there workers' comp or other legal liability for an employer who might have encouraged it? Even if the employer didn't mandate it, is an employee going to come back and say, well, I kind of felt like I had to, I felt like I had no choice, even though you said it was optional, but I kind of felt like I had to do it. And now I've experienced this side effect or this condition or this long-term effect. And so there was reluctance on our part to take a really strong position on it for a lot of reasons. We did the exact same thing that Michael did. We got our employees prioritized in every state where we could as, you know, essential workers. We did everything we could to make the vaccine available to employees who wanted it, and to make it as easy as possible for our employees to get it. But we really didn't push it, and we certainly aren't and haven't mandated it. I think that struck a nice balance with our workforce, because again, there are people on both sides of the argument. You know, you're never going to make me get a vaccine, or I'm never going to get that vaccine, versus people who see it as a ticket to freedom and, you know, normalcy in life. And so that was the discussion that we've had, and we're continuing to have, you know, even now. But we did everything we could to make the vaccine available, without like strongly encouraging it.
Great, thank you, Catherine. You know, even as we look at kind of at the national level with the EEOC, I think we would all agree we also have to kind of be mindful of the laws at the local level, right? And that important exchange. But it's fascinating to see how organizations are treating this differently, right? You can look at a company like Salesforce, for example, despite the fact that they're in Northern California and there are CDC guidelines, they still want their people to come back wearing masks with social distance, right? Despite what the law might say. A company like Eli Lilly is bringing back people this month, a quarter of them, but only the ones that have been vaccinated. Very interesting. Delta Airlines, not requiring current employees to get the vaccine, but all new employees have to have the vaccine. So it's fascinating to see how organizations are handling this a little bit differently. And so all of your insights were really crucial. Last question for round 3. And this time I'm going to try to limit you to 1 to 2 minutes, because we definitely want to have Michael Fricke and Mariah be able to bring to our panel general questions that have come from our participants, but this is one question for each of you. It's a little bit different. So Allie, I'm going to begin with you. People are talking a lot about returning to work, right? And a return to normal, if you will. So I wanted to know, what do you hope the new normal will look like for employees at work?
Yeah, so when I think of the return to work and the return to normal, what I'm hoping we're really saying is that we're making a return to the new normal, and that is a return to what I'm calling holistic humanistic work. So I think for me, one of the joys of the pandemic was the fact that I was able to be home for the entire year with our baby, who was born on March 10th, 2020. So she's like a true pandemic baby. We were in the hospital when everything got declared. And that's really restructured my entire life, right? And the pandemic has allowed me to work flexibly in a way that's allowed us to keep her home with us. Now, that's a choice we made, and we had a lot of privilege to make that choice. But in doing so, I think it's also facilitated a lot of discussions with colleagues who've opened up to me personally about their own struggles they've had with childcare or elder care, or a spouse who's fallen ill, or their own mental health struggles. And I think up until now, we've really had these ideal worker norms of what it means to be a good employee. Those are often people who are available 24/7 with no obligations, with no other concerns other for the job that they have. And that's unrealistic. And in my assessment and my research, to be perfectly frank, it's created some pretty unhealthy work environments and work habits. And so I hope if we take anything away from this year and the things that we've experienced, is that we realize that people are best when they are living their full authentic selves. And that means, letting the messiness of their lives come into work with them. So that's personally what I'm hoping for.
Thank you, Allie. Michael, with all the challenges and obstacles posed by this COVID experience, what are some of the insights and things you've learned that will be applied going forward? Same thing, 1 to 2 minutes, Mike.
Great. Well, I think bottom line is, I think it gave us another sense of testing our resiliency and our capability to accelerate maybe ideas that we all had or were thinking about, as far as, maybe with technology providing more and more connectivity access, we could work in different types of settings and not require everyone to come to one central location and be rigid in how we do things. I do think that with our lives, we kind of have this spectrum where, there's a melding over between work and personal lives, and we still need to look for the right boundaries there. And, Dr. Gabriel, I think you said it well, we have to be very careful about asking our employees to do things at all hours and to bleed into those areas that really are boundaries that we all need to respect. And from my standpoint, I'm a very big believer in that. When I call one of my folks, I want them to connect and to move if I'm calling them. I don't want to overuse that from the nature of accessibility, because it causes all sorts of problems. And I've been the recipient of that, as well as been very sensitive to not applying that. So we just need to keep ourselves in check going forward as we move to a hybrid type of environment for ourselves. And that's where we're going as Sempra, is a hybrid environment of bringing folks back 2 to 3 days a week after Labor Day. We're going to really need to make sure we focus in on a lot of these parameters going forward that we know we're resilient on now, but we do need to keep sort of the best things in our secret sauce of success moving forward. From my standpoint, just now having the capability of keeping ourselves off the congested Southern California roadways 5 days a week is a great thing if we're able to multiply that across the business communities and to be able to refocus and replenish things. So I see a lot of great opportunities here. I see a lot of opportunities that drive with our mission of being clean, safe, and reliable, and how we can do that in this brave new world. But do we have it nailed? No. It's going to take a little bit of time, I think, and testing on how we sort of move back into this environment. But from my standpoint, I think that the challenges and the obstacles that we faced over the last year or so have really made us stronger have enriched us better and will give us new ways of doing things that I think we're all going to gain from. And that's what it's really all about, isn't it? That we sort of gain as a society and move forward to that next level where we can continue to progress.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. And our final question for round 3 to Catherine. Catherine, do you think the experience of the pandemic has impacted how employees view the very concept of work? And if so, in what ways?
Yes, thanks. I think absolutely it has. And, as I tell my peers and team here, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. We've all had this common shared experience over the last year plus, and it's caused people to just sort of holistically reevaluate their lives and what are their priorities and what are their goals and how do they want to spend their time, and from a health standpoint and a relationship standpoint, hobbies. I mean, it's caused people to just do this reevaluation. And I think people are finding that they can be happy and they can live with a lot less, and they don't necessarily need to live to work. They can just work to live, to provide their needs, but they have other priorities. And the question in my mind, and I know many people's minds right now, is this a temporary thing, or is this more of a temporary phenomenon? Because you have economists and business leaders who are saying that by fall, everything's going to resume back to normal, back to the way things were. But then you have other people who say this is going to be like, this is an inflection point and a permanent change, and it's really more consistent with a movement. And the pandemic maybe accelerated that movement, but a movement in which employees demand to, kind of from a work-life balance and life priority standpoint, they demand to do things differently, and they may get what they want. Right now, there's a talent war out there, and people are changing jobs and quitting jobs in droves. The job quit numbers are really, really high. And so what are employees thinking? What are they doing? What do they want? And so I think it's just a really interesting time for all of us to be in, and to see, what is ahead. Is this a movement? And we are going to all see a permanently different way of approaching work and attracting and retaining our workforce, or things going to kind of settle down here again in a few months?
Yeah, great points, Catherine. As you were sharing your response, I also think a little bit about the impact this is going to have on the labor market, as far as whether it's, kind of hourly wages or salaries, and what that means kind of on a national average if workers do stay home. Employers reconsidering their footprints, right? If you are leasing or renting property, right? How does that figure into the business calculus, going forward? And then of course, just organizational structures, right? I look at Dr. Gabriel and you think a little bit about, all that technology has shown us, right? And the pros and the cons, and what will this mean for new organizational structures kind of going forward. So as with any symposium, right, we end up probably asking more questions that we can answer. But speaking of questions, I want to now move into our 4th round. So I'm going to go ahead and hand this over now to my colleague, Michael Fricke. So Michael, how have we been doing in terms of participants forwarding questions to you for our panel? How are we doing?
We're doing really good. There's been some really interesting questions coming up in the Q&A and in the chat. And so I want to focus on a few of those that I think are particularly relevant and interesting, including like the Q&A question that got the most upvotes, which is actually something that I had been thinking about as well, has to do with not with our employees. We spent a lot of time today talking about how we support employees going through these transitions, and how we identify employees who need more support or who are superstars. But what about leadership? And specifically for Mike and Catherine, how has leadership in your organization handled these changes? And what happens if you have, someone in leadership in your organization that is not doing well with trying to lead through this change. Is like, how would you handle that? Not from a top-down perspective, but from like a peer-to-peer perspective. So maybe, Mike, let's start with you, and then Catherine will move to you after that.
Oh, good question on leadership. And I think this kind of goes to the whole focus around, we have to have our own alignment and touch points too. I was getting, calls from our CEO constantly during the early phases of this, just to make sure that, hey, just, and not calls on, where's this or that, but just personal calls on how are things going. And I think those are very, very important. And as colleagues, it sort of set the tone for what we needed to do with each other. So we spent a lot of time just supporting each other in that context of making sure that we're effective and we're being taken care of, because if we're not, we certainly can't cascade that to our broader employee base. So, a lot of time spent in our executive meetings. We continue to have those and make sure that, we are putting our cameras on and connecting in that way. We are having, opportunities to be personal when we can. I just, saw one of my executive colleagues from the gas company today on a meeting, and I asked him how he was doing, and he just informed me he was a grandpa and his wife was retiring today, which is, those are those personal things that are just important that we can't lose sight of as we're out there trying to deliver on our mission. I mean, they might be little things, but they're very, very important. So I'm glad that question got brought up, and it kind of gets to, if we're not taking care of ourselves on the same basis, how can we possibly expect to provide that leadership shadow to our employees? Because they're looking at us, they're watching us. And again, the things that we're doing, if we're sweating and we're not confident and we're not providing that sense of stability, things unwind really, really fast.
All right, thank you, Mike. Catherine, how about you?
Sure. I agree with a lot of what Michael said. The leaders, have to take care of each other, and that was a strong message for us from the beginning. This is not a sprint. This is going to be a marathon. And so we need to pace ourselves. We need to stay together. Our leadership team we're in an interesting time right now as a company, because our CEO just announced his retirement a couple of months ago. And we have our new CEO is due to take the seat here in a couple of weeks. And so we have a team that's been together for a long, long time. And we know each other well. We knew each other well before the pandemic. And we did something that may be somewhat unique. We stayed together the entire time. Like, I'm in my office right now. We never went remote as a leadership team. We thought that, we did it as, we might be separately in our offices and socially distancing the whole time, but we physically came to work throughout the pandemic. Initially, it was for speed of decision making, and we could just, boom, 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 make these really key decisions that had to be made. But then after a while, we just sort of settled into it. But it enabled us to have probably better, more robust discussions on a lot of really key topics that this pandemic brought to the surface, in terms of things like we've been talking about today, leadership and motivation and our culture. And we had very spirited discussion. And we would, diverge, but then we'd converge and we'd come out aligned as a team. And so but we did try to keep that in mind, that it's really, really important for us to be a unified group, because everyone else in the organization sees that. So we've got to take care of each other before we can take care of the rest of the workforce.
I do this every time I talk on meeting. I always talk with my microphone muted. So this is my one time for today. So Dr. Gabriel, I want to kick it over to you with another question that was really popular in our Q&A. And as the organizational psychologist in the room, people want to know, like, when we bring people into our organizations, like we have our ideas about how we enculturate them with, the way things are done. When someone comes into our organization in a remote environment, how do we do that same process of onboarding and explaining in our culture to people who may never see us in person?
Yeah, and that's really, really tricky. I think that's one of the reasons why one of my colleagues, Anthony Klotz, wrote this really fascinating piece where he says that this period of time we're coming up to in organizations is going to be called the Great Resignation, where employees have had so much time at home, independent, whether they're new or more senior, that they've had all sorts of time to think about, like, do I actually want to work here? Do I want to change careers? Do I want to go back to school? Do I want to quit and try to just do nothing? And so I think this idea of culture is going to be really important, because I really think that's exactly what's going to happen. We're going to have a lot of people turning over, and newer employees to the organization are going to be in that really vulnerable pool. Whenever we talk about socialization, the rule of thumb is you get 90 days. Like 90 days is the period of time you get to really kind of indoctrinate people into the culture. And so what can we do? This is something we faced on a smaller scale here at Eller, because we had new doctoral students who came into our program, and I'm the director of that program, and we had to figure out a way to socialize them into this really robust program. And so things that we did was we tried to really enact formal and informal mentoring with them. So we really tried to build connections. So as the director, things I've encouraged managers to do is say, look, identify who the new people are and try to formally encourage some of these relationships to unfold, so people can pull them aside and say, okay, if we were in person, here's kind of what this would look like. And let me tell you a little bit about who these people are and why we're interacting with them. Of course, you can also encourage these informal discussions as well. And then in managers, it really is falling to the leaders of the organization to maybe engage a little more one-on-one with employees than they might otherwise, to share, like, look, here's kind of the expectations here. Or even better, I think, the expectations are unknown. And so why don't you tell me what you're looking for, right? And really building that conversation with them. In some ways, it might be even easier to socialize newer employees now, because so many things are up in the air about how we're going to proceed moving forward. And so bringing employees into that conversation and letting them help shape the new culture, I think would be a really cool way to socialize people that we've really never had the opportunity to do before. But yeah, so that'd be my general kind of insight or pieces of advice right now.
All right, thanks so much. There are actually a couple of questions that came up in the Q&A around a similar topic that I kind of want to explore with you all for a minute. And it's the topic of sort of like, I guess you could say, differentiating between workers. When we're all in the office, we have our systems of evaluation, obviously, but when we go, some of us remote, maybe most of us remote, now we have new systems, and it adds a layer of complication. So Catherine, maybe I'll start with you and ask you, like, how do you navigate this additional layer of complication of not only trying to evaluate whether your employees are doing their job and doing it well, but also, can they handle being remote? Has that impacted their ability to do their job? How do we differentiate when we're not seeing them on a daily basis? All those sorts of things. So Catherine, I'll kick it to you.
The mute there. So yeah, that's a great question. And we have different populations of employees within our workforce, and some are easier to evaluate, those who are showing up every day and they're on the front line, and those who are remote, it's become much more challenging. And there are, a lot of those remote employees are kind of knowledge-based workers, right? And they can work, very effectively remotely and don't necessarily need to be checked in with every day, but it's important that we do so. For some, roles are very transactional nature, and you can measure the outcome easily, and how many contracts they review today or how many customers they talk to. But for others, it becomes much trickier. And I think that's kind of back to what I was referencing earlier, which is just this, different leaders have different levels of trust with their employees, and some, their predisposition is I trust you until you give me a reason not to. And then there are others who, I don't trust you. You have to earn my trust. And those types of leaders may tend to micromanage more because they don't have that level of trust. So you got to find that balance. But you also, there's this added layer of, checking in on people and their well-being and how are they doing. And so that's why the importance of communication and touch bases. And, we try to do team meetings and people have adopted different styles of that. We have, I have one team who prior to the pandemic, they were traveling all over the country every day, all week long, and hardly ever saw each other or talked to each other except through email. And then through the pandemic, they started, very faithfully meeting twice a day, in the morning and at night, at the end of the day, whether they needed to talk or not, they touched base. And so sometimes it might be a 5-minute conversation, sometimes it might be a 30-minute, but it was a way for the leader to assess sort of the health and well-being, as well as the productivity of the employees on the team that day. So I think leaders have come up with a lot of different ways, but I think we're all still grappling with that. I hope that somewhat answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Catherine. Mike, how about you guys? Have you come up with any creative or effective ways to, evaluate your team members now that some are remote, some are in person, and they have that added complication?
Well, I think what Catherine said is spot on regarding sort of your different class. Transactional work obviously is much more about just continuing to look at production and how things are going and monitor and stay on top of it. But for the intellectual work, I think it very much is sort of the strength of leadership. I really look at our frontline supervisors, our managerial ranks, as being the ones that really set that tone and capability of how our employees, even in a physical office location, I can't possibly, see all of the work going on, throughout the company, but, having an idea about how the leaders are working with their employees and reporting up, and having those employees have opportunities to present their own work. And I think I mentioned that earlier, to me is actually a great way to really, trust yet verify that, yeah, there's a lot of good stuff happening within the ranks, that you're not just getting it in a report out or in a weekly status report, but you're actually giving opportunities for some of our employees to present what they're doing to a variety of the workforce. And oftentimes we're doing it at the executive level, where we've got a group of executives we've convened, and we're bringing employees in to say, okay, what is it you're working on? And let's get into those details. One of the things we've recently put into place is what we call a compliance counselor, where folks that are in new director roles or are moving into new roles as directors, we're bringing them to a small group, including myself and our president, where we're giving them an opportunity to talk about the challenges that they see in front of this new position, which really sets a unique tone, because it gives them that stage to say, here are some things I'm seeing within the first 60 to 90 days, and here are some things I have questions about. They're not feeling, they sort of are in a psychologically safe environment where they're actually having an opportunity to engage us in more of that manner, versus feeling like they're getting audited, feeling like they're being taken to task, etc. These are just a few examples where I really see opportunities where we can continue to embrace these sort of remote things that we've been doing, and whether we bring them back in, and we probably will when we go hybrid, these are great ways for us to strengthen that leadership connectivity, because that alignment needs to work its way through the spine of an organization, and you really do need to make sure you're constantly tensioning it and testing it through the course of your daily work. So, I think a lot of the things Catherine said we're doing as well, but these are a few things that personally I've seen and with my colleagues we've put in place to really put more on our leaders, but also give them tools to be more effective, so that they can, again, sort of flex in how our employees are doing things. I don't want to be in a world where we're just doing a monitoring mode and a policing mode. I really want us to be in a mode where we're more supportive leaders, more servant leaders, more about what can we do to make you more effective. Let's check in on that and keep you honest about it, but not one of, what have you done for me, and let's see it all, and I'm going to tell you what you've done wrong. And I think setting that right tone is so vitally important and particularly when you have that, the touch points are a little bit more removed from the standpoint of the remote setting.
All right, thanks, Mike. I think we have time for one more question, so I'm going to direct this one to Dr. Gabriel. And I think it's sort of appropriate to end on this because a lot of us are in this phase of like planning for returning to work, right? So maybe, Allie, you could give us just a few pointers, like what advice do you have for people as they're planning to return to work and they're trying to come up with a strategy? What should we keep in mind?
That's a good question because I am trying to figure out what this looks for me, and I don't know because it's really complicated, particularly again. So I will speak to my personal experience because it's salient to me. Maybe it's salient to some of you. We're looking at CDC guidelines, and we are 2 vaccinated adults with an unvaccinated child. And so for us, that has really created this really complicated, rational or irrational, sometimes decision-making game we're going through of what does this look like for us? What are we comfortable with and how are we going to do this? And so one thing that we have been doing is trying to figure out, well, first of all, let's remember how to go to work. I think that's starting point number 1. Like I forget what my commute looks like. I don't think I've driven my car more than 5 miles since like March of 2020. But it's to try to like relearn the routines and relearn my transition from home to work. If you all are like me, I always used my commute as that mental transition away from family and into the workspace. And then vice versa, I used the commute home from work to retransition back into the family domain. And so something that I've been trying to renegotiate with myself is, well, what do I want my personal new normal to look like in terms of how segmented my work and family is? And so I think having those conversations with yourself, with your family members, with people in your immediate network is one of the healthiest things you can do right now. And then hopefully being in an environment to have those honest conversations with your colleagues and hopefully your manager. I liked Michael's point about being in psychologically safe work environments. I think psychological safety gets misconstrued as this idea of like being too nice. And that's not really what it is. It's about being able to have hard conversations authentically and talking openly and honestly about how you're thinking and feeling about things. And so as you are thinking about the return to work, that's my other piece of advice. And what the literature and research would tell us is think about the people who you're going to be interacting with and have those conversations about what you want this to look like for you. So like, for Michael and Paul, I'm sure they're going to see me at work, not anytime soon because we're going on vacation on Tuesday. And after that, you're going to see me at work and I'll probably still be masked for a long time, not because I don't trust them, just because that's my own level of safety because we have a baby at home. Or a 15-month-old, whatever you want to call her. And so I think being comfortable and encouraging those conversations is going to make everybody feel better. I think this is going to be an uncomfortable transition for everybody, even people who have maybe scoffed at the virus or scoffed at vaccines. I think it's still going to feel weird because they're leaving their normal as well for what they've been doing over the last year. So I really hope we can have a really open conversations about these issues, and maybe that will carry forward in just how we talk about other issues in the workplace moving forward. And I hope I remember how to park my car in our parking garage.
Well, thanks, Allie. So I will say, as somebody who's clearly in our office, like it'd be great to see you here. So we look forward to seeing you. So thanks for the Q&A session. This was really, really interesting and informative. I'm going to kick it back to Paul as we wrap up our time here. Go ahead, Paul.
Perfect. Thank you, Michael. So, one of the things that you may have seen in our communication about the symposium is we're going through turbulent times. And what you've heard from each of our panelists is the importance of, as managers and leaders, giving our people a sense of psychological safety. And it's really fascinating how when I listen to Dr. Gabriel and Michael and Catherine, a couple things just came to mind that are so basic, but sometimes we need a reminder of it, right? So I wrote down the importance of communication, right? Whatever that medium might be, I don't know that you can do enough communication. The importance of transparency, right? Letting your people know what you're thinking about, getting input, having a systemized process for being able to incorporate that. Not that you're going to achieve perfect agreement, but that hopefully you're going to get some general consensus on where you're going. And then ultimately a sense of fairness, right? Recognizing that people are doing different types of work, kind of meet them where they're at. I almost kind of like to call it the CTF, right? Communication, transparency, and fairness. Our panel did an exceptional job. I just want to say a couple of thank yous before I hand it over to Mariah and we move into the final portion of our symposium. A big thank you to Doug Zanes and Zanes Law for his sponsorship. Thank you, Doug. It means a great deal to us. I just want to say thank you to you personally. I want to thank our panel, Dr. Gabriel, Michael, and Catherine, for sharing their expertise and venturing with us, right? Because these programs, you know, they always come with a few surprises, but I thought you all handled it very, very well, and you added a lot of value. I want to thank Michael as well for, you know, taking that part of the Q&A, which is never easy because you're always constrained by time, and we can only touch the very tip of the iceberg when it comes to questions. I'd like to also thank Mariah for everything. I mean, Mariah is involved in everything that we do. She's an integral part of our success in the center. So Mariah, thank you for everything. This program was months and months and months in planning. So I thought you did a fantastic job, Mariah. Thank you as well. And to our participants, you know, we love choices, right? We realize that, as you know, Dr. Gabriel said earlier, you're probably zoomed out, right? So that's why we did it on remote. No, I'll keep my day job. It's still virtual, right? And it's a Friday, and you made a choice to be with us, and I hope that we delivered on your expectations. And if not, I'm sure you're going to let me and others know if there are ways that we can improve this kind of going forward. So again, to our participants, thank you for your time. Before I say goodbye, I just want to now hand it over to Mariah. And Mariah, you now get to kind of explain to our participants and our panel what the next our final round of the program is. So Mariah.
Thanks. So a good portion of Remo is this, you know, webinar type setting, but they also have a setting that allows us to do more in-person type networking and, you know, in-person virtually, you know what I mean? But so what we're going to do now is we're going to go over to that table setup, and before anything happens, I just want to say, please go ahead and update your profile so that whenever you are networking with people, they know who you are. I'm going to ask all of the panelists to go up to the 4th floor. You'll notice on the left-hand side of the screen, there will be floors that you can go to. Each of our panelists will have a table set up for them. And that will give people an opportunity who didn't have their questions answered to kind of, you know, go over and just continue the conversation for the next 15 minutes or so. Other than that, you know, it's all open networking. Feel free to pick a table. You're more than welcome to move around as well. Just double click on the next table. When we first go into that new screen, on the left hand side, you'll also see a spot for Zanes Law if you want to get some more information on their company and see a little video that they've put. And on the right hand side, we do have an event survey that we ask you guys fill out and just let us know how we did. If you want to suggest some topics for a future symposium, that type of thing. It's a really brief survey. So with that said, we'll go ahead and exit. If you have any questions, feel free to send me a chat or hit that question mark in the bottom of the screen to chat with the Remo customer service. Alrighty.